If you've ever seen a date in Airtable that looks right in your view, but looks wrong in an automation, this video is for you. We're going to be exploring the dates, time zones, how they interact with automation, and all those little traps that might get you along the way. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how Airtable handles your dates and how to present your information so that your global team is always on the same page and collaborating efficiently. So if learning more about dates and time zones in Airtable is of interest to you, stick around and let's get into it. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Gareth and this is Gap Consulting. It's our mission to help you unlock the full potential of Airtable and the other no-code tools in this space. And in this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive, as we said, on dates and time zones, specifically how they might show one way, but then be reflected another. So this is a tricky subject and we're going to have to go step by step. Now, before we get into the heart of the video, I do want to first invite you to join me for some free training. If you're new to Airtable or if you don't feel like you fully grasp the fundamentals, grab my free Airtable crash course. There I outline for you the key building blocks of Airtable so that you can really start to master this software and unlock the full potential of the tool. You can sign up for free at gapconsulting.io/airtable-crash-course. And we will share with you straight to your inbox bite-sized lessons so that you can start mastering the fundamentals. But without further ado, let's hop on into my screen and we're going to take a look at a date field. Seemingly innocuous here, but there's a lot here underneath the surface that can be unpacked. The first and most important thing to understand about dates, and specifically date times in Airtable, is that Airtable thinks of dates in UTC, which is the Coordinated Universal Time. This is really how most computers think about time. The fact that they are then doing some translation on the Coordinated Universal Time to move things to your time zone wherever you are relative to that UTC on the globe. Now, case in point here, outside of Airtable entirely, I'm going to open up my time zone settings in my computer. And right now, because I'm in Europe, you'll see that my time zone is reflected as Dublin, Edinburgh, Lisbon, and London. So this is Western Europe, and I'm basically on UTC. Now, for the purpose of this video, it's not going to make a lot of sense for me to explain the difference between UTC and the time zone you might be working from. So I'm going to disable my time zone automation settings, and I'm going to actually change my time zone. Let's say I go back to Pacific time as an example. So I'm now 8 hours ahead of UTC. And if you're not a time zone wizard, which frankly I never was until I had to learn this for Airtable purposes, this number, when you look at a time zone, is telling you how far ahead or behind UTC you are. So Pacific time, as an example, is -8, meaning it's 8 hours behind UTC. So when UTC is noon, then Pacific time is 8 hours before that. It's 4 a.m. instead of 12 p.m. So this is how the UTC kind of works around the globe. And computers, again, are going to always, for the most part, start with UTC and then translate it to your local time zone. And so a key takeaway here is that Airtable is going to usually be showing you dates and times that are reflected in your browser settings that are driven by your computer's time zone. So now that I've adjusted my time zone to be in Pacific for my time, when I refresh my page here, this is now going to show up here in Pacific time. So Airtable is now saying, you're in Pacific time, PST, Pacific Standard? Gotcha. So this time that was reflected differently previously is now showing up like this. Now, how do we control the time zone? It's all right here in the settings of a date. Now, you might not always think to look here because you might just really quickly say, do I need a time on this date? Yes or no. You might toggle on time, but it is important for you to think about the fact that you have the display time zone option and also the use the same time zone for all collaborators option. If we toggle this on, what it's going to do is allow us to establish a time zone that we want to use across everybody's database. So if you're working with a global team, it's going to translate whatever time you put in there to whatever time zone you tell it you want to display. But the thing that you need to understand is this only has to do with the display of the time zone. In the background, Airtable is still thinking about the date time in UTC. And that's super important because it's going to impact how this date time works with automations and formulas and all kinds of stuff. UTC is the gold standard for the date time, no matter how it shows up on your Airtable database or Airtable interface. Now, again, I really like to include the time zone here, displaying it so that my users, wherever they are on the globe, are going to know what this is. So here it is, it's saying, look, this is now set to be 4 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If I get rid of this and I don't want to do that, then it will again allow the browser to transition it back to the user. So it's going to put it in the user's relative time zone. You might have to do some refreshing here, especially if you're tweaking your time zones for your computer. So this is showing up as 4 a.m. Pacific time, and any changes that I make are going to impact the way that Airtable thinks about it in UTC. That is your key takeaway here. And also understanding that you can allow people to see it in their current time zone or localize it to one specific time zone across your organization. Now let's dive into some localization basics. So we're going to take a look now at how this can translate into different time zones. So I've built some formulas here that are going to show us what the date time stamps are in these other regions of the world. Now, again, remember, we are seeing this date at 7 a.m. in Pacific time. So obviously New York is going to be 4 hours after that or 3 hours after that. So it's going to show up as 10 a.m. or 1000. Now, London is a bit beyond that. So another 5 hours after New York. How do you get these outputs? Well, these are really formulaic outputs translating this information here. This can be done with a combination of setting your time zone and then setting a specific date time format. So the first of these is the set the time zone right here. The part that's highlighted is saying, I'm going to take this field, the date field, and I want to output it in this time zone setting. Now we've got a bunch of different options for time zone settings, and I would recommend that you search the Airtable documentation to see all of your different options. But generally it works like this. Tell it the country and then tell it a major city within that country after a slash. So in this case, America / new _ York is going to give us that East Coast time zone. Similarly here for London, I'm going to see Europe, well, continent in this case, Europe, and then London, and then I'm getting the same idea here. So it's within the set time zone. Now that we've set the time zone to a specific location, the next part is displaying the output in a specific output. And that has to do with the date time format. So let me make this a little bit larger to see. This whole piece right here is the part of another formula. I'm taking the output of the set time zone, and I'm outputting it in a very specific format that looks like this. 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 2-digit hour, 2-digit minute. So that turns 7 a.m. Pacific time into an output for London of 1500, or in New York, 10 o'clock. So this way we're able to display in other time zones what's happening and kind of hard code that formulaically. Now, the key takeaway here is that using these types of formulas can help us to normalize the way that we are interpreting the data before we get to automations, as I'll show you in the next step of this video. But the key understanding is, number one, Airtable thinks of this in UTC. we see it in our local time zone, and we can then interpret that data to a specific time zone if we want, for the purpose of automations or some other workflow within our organization. Now let's dive into some automations and specifically where this will impact you. So we will set up first a new automation that will trigger at a scheduled time. Maybe you need to send out something every Friday at 8 a.m. or you want to run a report every Monday at 10 a.m. Or maybe it's daily. We can set our interval type here. So if we were doing something weekly, let's say, we would say every week, no problem, on Mondays, I want this thing to trigger. When? Okay, well, 8 a.m. Cool. This seems pretty easy. The important thing to understand is that this is going to happen in your time zone when you set up this automation. Now, remember, Airtable right now thinks that I'm in Pacific time because that's how I set my computer to reflect time. So I'm building this automation as of triggering every Monday at 8 a.m. But if my corporate office is in New York, I need to do the math because I don't want this to trigger at 8 a.m. Pacific time. I might want it to trigger 8 a.m. New York time. So I'd have to walk this back 3 hours and actually set this to be 5 a.m. if my intent is to trigger it at 8 a.m. Eastern. Airtable does give us this call out right here to basically say, hey, you're setting this up in your local time zone as it's relative to the time zone that you might want to impact, but it's easy to overlook. So make sure that when you're setting things up on a scheduled time, that you're doing it this way. Now, this is very different in practice to another automation that you might use. Let's say we have another automation that says, I want to take an action when certain conditions are met. Specifically, table here, and I'm going to choose my date field. And I might say something like, when my date is an exact date or is today in Pacific time. So what is this? The trigger will fire when a record in the table matches the provided conditions. It only includes records that have not already matched the conditions, right? But note that the day is today, Pacific time. So this is taking into account my time zone and will trigger when the record matches those conditions. But here's the thing that might be a little bit difficult. The record itself, depending on the time zone and where Airtable thinks that record is, it might not always align to your day. So it's very common that we see, especially from clients in the United States, having records that are triggering a day before they intended because the way that Airtable is interpreting Greenwich Mean Time, or UTC. It's taking that time zone, applying it at maybe midnight the day before that the user actually intended the thing to be reflected. So you might need to test this out a little bit and make sure that your automations are working within your own time zone. But if you're struggling, that might be why. Now, the other thing to take into consideration here is that this time zone is reflecting, when the date becomes today, which happens at midnight. And that might not be the best time to trigger all your automations. So for this, you might want to build some formulas in the background that actually do a lot of the thinking for you. Let me show you an example of a formula that you might use for something like this. Let's head back to our data, and we will get rid of these formulas and we'll bring in some others. Now, I don't really like to use the now function, but basically this formula is asking Airtable to evaluate this moment in time. It's not always down to the second. It's usually, within a couple minutes. But the reason I don't like to use it is because it's really resource intensive on your database. It's requiring their formulas to recalculate quite often, which is putting a lot of pressure on your database and could slow it down if you have a lot of records. So use this one sparingly. But what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're evaluating this moment in time and we're setting the time zone to be America, Denver, and then we want to display it like this. Now, this is similar to the formulas we looked at previously. So this moment, regardless of where I am on the globe, this moment in Denver is reflected as November 9th. Now, we might want to compare that to the date here that we've chosen. And so we can compare this date in Pacific time to the same idea. So we're saying set the time zone for this date, compare it to America Denver, and then tell us what that is. And then you can write a formula that combines all of this. I know that this is pretty deep and hairy, but with the help of some ChatGPT or some AI formula help, you can get these results. Basically, you're trying to compare a moment in time in a specific time zone to a moment in time that could be reflected in another time zone, and you want to see if they're occurring on the same date. Because if this date is, let's say, 7 a.m. in London, it will not be the same day in Hawaii, right? So we really need to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples and that our dates are lining up appropriately across time zones for our triggered automations. The key takeaways here are understanding that Airtable is always thinking in UTC. However, when we're building automations, it's using the user's local time zone based on the computer settings or browser settings when they set this all up. So take that into account when you are building and working with a global team. So a couple of closing thoughts for you. Number one, avoid mixing dates with date times. Even though you might not see a time on your date, Airtable is thinking of it as 0 Greenwich Mean Time, or midnight. So even if you haven't stipulated a time to be displayed, Airtable is still always thinking in UTC. Make sure that when you're using dates, you don't mix them with date times. Because of the fact that this date is holding this invisible midnight UTC, it can get really confusing when you're mixing it with a date time. So try to keep these things separate. Use dates only with dates only fields and use date times with date time fields. Number two, always specify your time zone in your formulas, and wherever possible, as best practice, make sure that you're sharing the date time zone and displaying the time zone in browsers. Most people don't even think about the fact that the time zone is relative to their browser settings, their computer settings. This is true not only for the data layer, but also Airtable interfaces and Airtable forms. So when you're submitting information via forms, interfaces, or data, it has to do with your time zone settings. Make sure you understand and that your team has their time zone settings set appropriately, and if not, that they're doing the proper math in their heads before submitting date times. Number three, test your automations with collaborators in other time zones whenever possible. Make sure that you get the results you expect across your global team before you go deploying time-specific automations, just in case something is not showing up as intended. And lastly, number four, don't assume that the displayed time is equivalent to the way that Airtable thinks about it, because unless you're in UTC, it's probably not. Airtable's thinking about this thing in its normalized UTC, and you're seeing the local time zone on your browser. Without these tips, time zones can feel a little bit like voodoo, but if you follow these steps, it is going to ensure that you get excellent results with your time zone settings in Airtable. I hope you got a ton of value from this video, and if you have questions that we did not cover, swing by our website because we have a ton of resources available for you, and we offer complimentary strategy calls to help you on your Airtable build-out. If you loved this content, we'd appreciate a thumbs up and subscription to the channel so that you can see more of our videos, but most importantly, keep on building.